Welcome to Lessons That Last, where a researcher and a teacher talk about what it means to make a lasting impact on students' lives. They unpack the stories former students shared about their memorable teachers and discuss how we can all make a greater impact on the people in our lives. Here's Julie and Laura.
Hello and welcome back to Season 2 of the Lessons That Last podcast. I'm Julie Hesson, professor, educational researcher, and with me is my lovely co-host,
Laura Estes Swilley, English teacher, writer, and I'm so glad you're here. Come on, sit with us, bring a friend.
You can always sit with us. We're going to talk all things teaching, and today especially high school teaching, because I have noticed here at App that we have a lot of tours coming in. So prospective students and parents, and I've been thinking about that time when kids are trying to decide where they're going to go to school, worrying about how am I going to get into the school I want to get into, and like all the things, sort of prepping for college applications. I thought about you, high school English teacher. Do you get at this time of year bombarded with requests for recommendations?
Yes, absolutely. I have noticed that Florida schools have deadlines that are in November and October to apply. And I don't get as many requests at that point because they don't know me very well and I don't know them very well. They know their 11th grade teacher really, really well. So often they sort of touch back and get the college recommendations there. I still do some, but not as many. At this time of the year, start all of the recommendation letters for scholarships.
Okay.
And I get a lot of requests, and I think I get a lot of requests because I'm known to be a good letter writer. My letter is going to give people the feels. So when I talk to my students about writing their college application essay, we spend a lot of time on that because it's a very different type of writing than they're used to. I talk to them about how you are just flat on a computer screen. Your application is just, numbers and letters, and they see your GPA and you got a B in this class and whatever. But you need to make that admissions counselor who's looking at your application care about you, be engaged with you in some way. Are you going to make them laugh? Are you going to make them feel that heart smile? Are you going to make them feel compassion? What do you want from them? And if you don't do that, you're not in the room. You have to be in the room. So I think I work so hard with them on their writing and getting themselves in the room that they realize I know how to do it, and then they want me to do it for them. So yes.
So how do you manage all of that? Like, do you have a system? How do you write all of those very individual letters?
It's hard. I would say that I don't manage it well. And I don't think any of us do. I don't know a single teacher who's like, oh yeah, I've got these letters of recommendation under control. Everyone who is handling letters of recommendation becomes overwhelmed with them because we've got all the other things we're trying to do. And then there's this student who is coming to you hat in hand, basically saying, will you please write this letter for me? And you want to do your best work for that student. And so it's a time management issue. I know teachers will say, I spent 2 hours at my kitchen table last night writing 3 recommendation letters. And I'm like, yeah, I know. There's not, I think, an easy way to manage it. I do always keep an electronic file full of recommendation letters. And I tell my students all the time, we will customize this for any scholarship you're applying for. So once I get the base letter written, I can very easily change it to reflect, like if you're applying to my college that I went to, that will be in the letter. If you're applying for a scholarship for a women's group, that will be reflected in the letter versus the Cattlemen's Association, that will be reflected. So that's the only management I have. Everything else is just like, you're on fire and you have to get it done.
I have this colleague who his love language is efficiency. Like if
Mhm.
you can show him an efficient way to do anything, like you are his person. And it's hard to do because he usually has figured out the most efficient way to
Right.
do. And he's all about the AI and the chat GPT. So I'm
Mhm.
going to have to ask him, we write recommendation letters for our master's
Yes.
students who are going into doctoral programs or trying to get a school administration position. And I'm willing to bet that he has said to chat GPT, I have this type of student who's done these kinds of things applying for this position, and now write it in the tone of JD Salinger or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about that. That is not my wheelhouse, but I'm going to ask him and I will let you know.
No judgment on anyone who can make letter of recommendation easier. But I could never do that. Mine has to be pure and it has to come from me.
Mm-hmm.
We talked last podcast about writing and no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. And I know what I'm trying to do with that letter, and it's a job. And I'm going to make sure it happens. And I don't want to have to go back into something that AI wrote and revise it. I would rather get myself in there the first time and then revise it, because there's always revision. It always has to be the best. Right. And often I will send my students the letter and say, please read over this and make sure that it says all the things you want it to say, because you can't get everything in. Sometimes you have to let go of president of the dance team, you know what I mean? But if that's like super important for some reason and it's reflected in the application in a way I don't know, then I need to get it in there and you need to tell me. And so you have to give them permission to tell you if something's missing or something needs to be added.
Yes. So you picked a story today about this very topic, Ava's story. So why did you pick Ava's story today?
Ava's story kind of reminded me of me in a way. And the idea that as a student, you often don't know what your teachers or professors see in you. I think if you're very emotionally aware, you realize they adore you, but you don't know why. You don't know what they see that, engages them with you in a different intellectual level. And I had this experience in college. I had a professor who I loved, and he actually, I think in one class taught me more about writing. It was a literature class, not a writing class, but it was one of my last classes. I think he taught me more about writing than almost anyone did, especially in college. And he wrote me a letter of recommendation to apply to be a teacher. And I remember picking it up from him and walking through the hallway in the Cooper Hall in the building. And I was reading it and I had to stop because I was stunned. Like, where did he get this? How did he know? It felt like he could see the inner workings of my mind by reading this letter. And I felt like that's Ava. Ava had that watershed moment of, I'm being seen and I don't even know I'm being seen. And it changes your perspective. So I felt like this is something that happens to a lot of kids this time of year, and adults who are getting them from college professors. I was 30 years old, Julie, and I was getting this letter, realizing I was being seen. It was amazing. So how profound for a high school senior.
Sweet. And to feel known and seen is such a vote of value and someone's confidence in you, and just such a beautiful gift to give someone that feeling of being seen.
Yes.
So would you, Laura, read Ava's story about Mr. Luis?
I will. Although I worked hard to meet the academic expectations for scholarships, I was nervous about asking my teachers to write letters of recommendation. My guidance counselor had advised me to give my teachers plenty of time to write the letters. She also suggested I provide my teachers with some information about myself and about the scholarship requirements to help them draft the letters. My first recommendation letter came from my English teacher, Mr. Luis. He gave me an extra copy of the letter to keep. I waited until I got outside of the school to read it. My teacher certainly made an effort to forge relationships with his students, but that letter was evidence of just how well he knew me. He wrote about my penchant for asking questions and my attention to detail. He even included my interest in contemporary literature authored by women of color. It was wonderful to feel known by my teacher. I respected and admired Mr. Luis, and I realized he had devoted discretionary time and attention to me. That letter meant more to me than the scholarship it helped me receive. I still have it in a box with other accolades from my high school years. It brings back sweet memories of my time with Mr. Luis, and it reminds me of the importance of making people feel seen and known.
Oh, Mr. Louise.
Mm-hmm.
That sentence where she talks about discretionary time and effort. Like the people who love us and they don't have to.
Yes.
It's such a beautiful gift.
It is. It is. And, I try to teach my students mostly because I listen to my colleagues about how much discretionary time they're devoting and how much attention and how much care goes into these letters. And often, and I think it's because now put yourself in Ava's shoes. She read this letter. She was overwhelmed by it. What did she say to Mr. Luis? How did she thank him for that? She probably didn't go back, like a double back with a note of thanks, or because it's awkward. I thanked you when you handed me the letter. Now I can't go back and say, I read the letter and it means so much to me. And, because that's awkward when you're 18 years old and you're looking at your 45-year-old teacher. So I talk to my students about what it takes to write a good recommendation letter and about the time that their teachers and guidance counselors and coaches and principal are spending. And I tell them, you owe everyone who writes you a letter a sincere thank you, a thank you note in writing. So I tell them, I don't think they always do it, but it needs to be acknowledged because Mr. Luis put himself on that page to help Ava. And I'm not saying she didn't thank him, but she is 18. The chances of her feeling confident enough to go back and have a conversation about that are slim. But what a beautiful gift he gave her. And I think that needs to be acknowledged.
And it is an example of what we talk about in all of these stories. As teachers, most of the time, we don't realize the impact we make. Most of the people who shared the stories that are in our Lessons That Last book about their teachers never told their teachers.
Right.
And once they got old enough to tell the story to us or to tell the story to other people, didn't probably take the time to find that teacher and go back and say, this is what you meant to me. This is the memory I have of you. This is the impact you made on my life. So by doing the things that Mr. Luis did and that you do for your students and helping them feel seen, we're making this lasting impact, but we don't even know it.
Right. It's a labor of love. It's just simply a labor of love. And I think you bring up every once in a while the social emotional learning that we need to be doing versus the way we're doing it.
The workbook.
The workbook. A handout.
I will do my rant on the social emotional learning.
Or in Florida. I mean, later. Come on, Julie. It's a computer program in Florida for high schoolers. So it's not a book. So if we're really engaging in social emotional learning, this is one of the times that we could really make an impact with kids where they understand. So I try to be transparent about that with my kids, not in relation to me, but in relation to the other teachers that they're asking. And sometimes a teacher will give me a letter. Hey, this kid's in your first period. Will you hand this to them? And then I will prompt them. Did you get oh, wow. You know how much work that is. And I let them know this teacher really poured themselves into this letter for you, so that they know that they're important and they're important enough for us to spend that time.
There's this study about student confidence and belief in themselves, and what gives them that level of confidence. And the researchers asked students, how do you know your teacher thinks you're smart?
Yeah.
And it is always about discretionary time and effort.
Yeah.
It's about the lessons we take time to plan. When kids know when you've taken some time to plan a lesson that addresses their needs, it's about the feedback we give them,
Yes.
the conversations we have. And I think too, about loving them enough to have uncomfortable conversations and tell them the truth. Because the people who made an impact on me, like lasting impact, it wasn't always the beautiful like letter that highlighted my strengths. Like sometimes it was they saw me and they saw some potential, but there was some correction that needed.
Right.
I think about Scott Myers, who was my first principal in Hillsborough County where we worked, and the one who convinced me to become a school administrator. And when I was a teacher leader and I was trying to develop those skills, tough love, like feedback, but it was love. And he loved me enough to tell me the truth and try to help me grow. It was things like when we would sit in a challenging parent meeting, he would tell me, like, you can't say these things. And then the next meeting after it, I'd be like, I didn't say those things. And he would say, but your face said all the things.
Right.
And then the next meeting, I'm like, but my face, he's like, Hassan, it's your eyebrows. You cannot control your eyebrows. But I'm a better leader because he was honest with me. So sometimes discretionary effort isn't the lovely letter. It's the honest but loving conversation. So what do you do when kids ask for a letter of recommendation, if they are not your most stellar, they have some room to grow? How do you approach that?
Well, not most stellar and room to grow. That is not a student who is difficult to recommend. Not at all.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask, what about the students who are like a problem or
sleep through class?
Right. Now,
Yes.
those are hard conversations. But a student who maybe is struggling, who has room to grow, who's not a top grade wise, it's very easy to recommend, especially if they are working, if they're doing the struggle, because the struggle is beautiful and the struggle is what education is. You're not supposed to come in great at this. You wouldn't need the class, right? We could take a test the first day and you could test right out of it. You have things to learn. And if you're in it, if you are in that trench with me, I have more to say about you than I have to say about the valedictorian who glides in and is good at everything school.
Do you feel like you have those conversations with students, like before it gets to the point where there's a final grade or they're asking for a recommendation letter? Like, do you find a way before those times to give kids some honest feedback? And how do you do that?
I think we all do that. I think every teacher who just heard that question was like, of course she does that, Julie, because they know they do it. But everyone does it differently. I have a lot of one-on-one, I want to call them flyby conversations, but they're not flyby in a way that they're superficial. But it's in the middle of class, we're working, and I'm with you for a minute, and we're having a very specific conversation. And it could be a corrective conversation. It could be an encouragement conversation. It could be a redirection conversation. And often it is I know you can do better than this. I believe in you. I've seen it. So let's go. And it just, a little pick-me-up conversation, basically. Yeah. So I think I have hundreds of those every day.
Just a little side by side.
Yep. A little side by side. And then the bigger issues. So I do a lot of, especially with my AP students, we do writing conferences. So the professor I mentioned who wrote the amazing letter for me, he taught me this. I give you the score you earned. And if you want a chance to revise it, meet with me. That's it. If you don't want to meet with me, you don't revise it. If you don't want to revise it, you don't have to meet with me. And sometimes they're happy with their score, but they still want the meeting, which I love. Like, that's a kid who's in it and in the struggle. So I do those conferences where we talk very honestly and openly. It's just the two of us. This is where you went astray. This is where you were on it and doing so well. What happened? And sometimes I'll say to them, is this where you got tired? And they're like, oh my gosh, how do you know? Or is this where you lost focus and tried to bring yourself back? Oh my God, how do you know? Well, I can tell, I can read it. And they don't know that until you tell them. So I do a lot of one-on-one conversations.
I love that. I don't get to talk to K-12 students too often, but every now and then I get invited to either Zoom in or come into a classroom to talk about my research. So I met with a middle school class, not last year, the year before, and I did my presentation, and there was this kid in the front, like you couldn't not look at him. He was so like busy. And so when I finished, I said, does anybody have a story you want to share about one of your teachers, like your teachers now or your past teachers? And of course, he's the first one that's hanging out of the seat. And it was about a difficult conversation. And he said, I'm a little extra. And this teacher he was now in 7th grade. So when I say it was his 6th grade teacher, pulled me after class one day because I was having trouble getting along with other kids and I wasn't making friends. And she said, I love that you're extra, but sometimes you're a little extra. And I'm wondering if that's so that people don't really see the real you. And it'll be hard for you to make friends unless you let people see the real you. And it was such a sweet thing. And one of the other kids said, wow, man, didn't that hurt your feelings? And he said, no, man, teachers only tell you stuff like that if they care about you.
I love that. I love
the power of a hard conversation.
Yes.
Like they know that something's not right. Like your writers, they know where the writing wasn't great. And if you don't say something, then you miss an opportunity to say to a kid, this is how you know I care about you.
Yes. I just had one of those conversations this week. I have a student who is, he's like a triple extra and he moved from one class to another. He's had a schedule change.
He brought all his extraness to a new group of friends.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I was very intentional about his seating, where he's going to sit and who was going to sit around him. And I picked the very most mature students in my class. But you still never know how the new kid is going to affect the room. Mm-hmm. And he did affect the kid sitting next to him, who is probably the hardest worker I have in that classroom, who he was writing a poem this week and he started it, got feedback, started it again, got more feedback. Like he was on and on and on. And he's not a poet, and he doesn't, I think, probably care about poetry, but he cares about doing it right and being good at what he does. So he's sitting next to a triple extra. And it was like one of them was definitely leading the other, and it was not the way I wanted it to go. And so the bell rang and I said, hey, hang back for a minute. And he hung back and I said, I very consciously place this student next to you because I love what you do in this room. You're such a leader. You are so focused and you care about what's happening here. And he said, yes, yes, yes. He was all in with me. And I said, and then he came and do you know what I saw today? And he said, I do. And I said, so tell me what's going on. Like, do I need to not have you there? Because I will absolutely make that happen. And he said, no, I need to redirect. I have to, I know exactly what you're talking about, but he just needed me to bring it to his attention. And he needed me to say, I see it.
Yeah.
And that's what they need. They need to be seen. Good, bad, ugly. indifferent. They need us to see them and to let them know. And sometimes it's that difficult conversation. Sometimes it's the pleasant conversation. Sometimes it's, I found this really cute sticker and it's not right for me, but I know it's right for you. And I leave it on your desk. It takes so many different forms, but we can always show we see them.
Yeah. Well, think about my little middle school friend.
Yeah.
Nah, man, teachers don't say that unless they care about you.
Exactly.
Love that.
Exactly. I love that.
I thought that's all of my research right there summed up.
Yeah. But and think about him. I would love to meet him because he was extra, and before he was extra, but yet he understood that idea that this woman is telling me this because she cares about me. So even though he's extra, he's picking up a lot of signals. You know what I mean? He's learning all the things.
He's a smart kid, clearly.
Yeah.
And knew he was struggling and wanted to do better.
Yes.
And so she came in and provided the support he needed through a difficult conversation and probably ongoing support and ongoing conversations. Mm-hmm. So I think back to Ava and Mr. Luis. I have a need. You were aware of my need because I've had to come to you heart in hand and say, I need this recommendation and I've put together this information for you and would you please? And he went above and beyond to fill that need for her with discretionary time and effort and so much love in helping her feel seen.
Yes. And that is just an extension of the relationship that they had already built and the culture that he had built in his classroom. If you don't do that work, you don't know your student well enough to bowl them over with a letter of recommendation.
Yeah. Beautiful. So let's set that intention for the week ahead. Let's find ways to help our students feel seen.
Yeah.
And let's, as much as we can, I've been asking myself lately because we all have limited time and energy and we can't give ourselves totally away and still give to others. I've been trying to ask myself in these situations, what is the most generous response I can give right now? And so maybe we say when we have these opportunities, as often as we can, we'll be as generous as we can.
I like that.
Take care of the people we love and still take care of ourselves. So friends, you can find this story in the Lessons That Last book.
Yes.
If you're reading along, it is lesson 54 titled Knowing and Noting. If you don't have your copy yet, we will drop a link to the book in the show notes. If you are loving the Lessons That Last book, you can make our writer hearts happy with a little review. You don't even have to write anything. Click some stars on there, friends. It'll help other readers find the book. And we thank you for all the many ways you help your students, your colleagues, the people you love feel seen.
Yes. And thank you, friends, for spending a little time with us today.
Have a great week.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you will subscribe to the Lessons That Last podcast wherever you listen. Give us a rating too, which will help other listeners find us. And don't forget to visit chalkandchances.com for more stories. You can also find more information on Julie's research in books. While you're there, take the quiz to find out what kind of memorable teacher you are. I took it and was surprised by what I found. I think you'll find good food for thought. Let us know about your quiz results. We hope you will meet us here each week and bring a friend to share the conversation.